I'm Blaze, 32 years old, and I never thought I'd be on the run from my own family. When my father demanded I liquidate my life savings to cover my sister Haley's gambling debt of $870,000, something inside me finally snapped. After years of being treated like the family ATM, I smiled, nodded, and made the biggest decision of my life. Before diving into how I vanished and rebuilt my life, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. Hit that subscribe button and stick around to see what was in that box that made my father scream. Growing up in suburban Boston, Massachusetts, I always knew my place in the family hierarchy. My father, Richard, made it abundantly clear that my sister Haley was the golden child, while I was simply expected to be the responsible one. This dynamic defined our childhood, with Haley receiving praise for minimal effort, while my achievements were treated as the bare minimum expectation. Our modest two-story colonial house on Maple Street housed a family that looked normal from the outside. Dad worked as a bank manager, Mom taught elementary school, and we were your typical middle-class American family. At least that's what the neighbors thought. Behind closed doors, the favoritism was painfully obvious. When Haley brought home a C-, she'd get congratulated for trying her best. When I brought home straight A's, I'd get asked why there weren't more extracurriculars on my report card. The pattern was established early. Haley could do no wrong, and I could never quite do enough. Everything changed when Mom died of breast cancer when I was 16. She'd been the buffer between Dad's expectations and my reality, the one person who celebrated my achievements without immediately raising the bar higher. Her absence left a gaping hole in our family dynamic, and Dad's favoritism toward Haley only intensified after we lost Mom. I threw myself into academics as a coping mechanism, spending hours in the school library to avoid our increasingly empty-feeling house. My dedication paid off when I earned a partial scholarship to MIT. I still remember Dad's response, "Well, partial doesn't cover everything, does it?" Meanwhile, Haley had dropped out of community college for the second time, which was somehow justified because school isn't for everyone. At MIT, I found my calling in computer science. For once, I was surrounded by people who valued the things I was good at. I worked part-time jobs throughout college to cover expenses, often pulling all-nighters to balance work and studies. I graduated with honors and landed a job at Tech Fusion, a prestigious software development company in Boston. While I was building my career, Haley was building a pattern of financial disaster. She'd attempt a semester at college, drop out, then cycle through retail jobs she'd inevitably quit because the manager had it out for her. Meanwhile, her apartment was filled with designer clothes and the latest electronics. When questioned about her spending, she'd get defensive. I deserve nice things after how hard I work. The first time Haley called me in financial distress was 3 months after I started my job at Tech Fusion. She was crying about potentially being evicted over $3,000 in back rent. I transferred the money immediately, worried about my little sister becoming homeless. Dad called later that evening. "That's what good brothers do. Your mother would be proud." That established the pattern for the next decade. Haley would accumulate debt through impulsive spending, gambling, or simply not paying her bills. She'd cry to Dad, who would then pressure me to help out the family. The amounts escalated over time. $5,000 for a car repair, though the car mysteriously got upgraded. $12,000 for emergency dental work, which somehow included non-essential cosmetic procedures. $20,000 to help with a business opportunity that never materialized. Each time, the request came with emotional manipulation. "Family takes care of family," Dad would say. Or, "Your mother would be so disappointed in your selfishness if I dared to question the frequency or amount of these financial rescues." Despite this drain on my resources, I managed to progress in my career. I advanced from junior developer to project lead, then to senior software engineer. By 30, I had purchased a modest but comfortable condo in Cambridge and had built a respectable investment portfolio. I worked 60-hour weeks, took on additional consulting projects, and lived well below my means to achieve this financial stability. My relationship with my family grew increasingly distant. Holiday gatherings became tense affairs where I'd brace myself for the inevitable money discussions. Haley would flaunt her latest purchases while complaining about being broke. Dad would corner me with pointed questions about my excess savings and whether I was hoarding money while family struggles. I tried setting boundaries. I established a monthly allowance for Haley that went directly to her landlord. I offered to help her create a budget. I even suggested therapy for what was clearly becoming a shopping addiction. Each attempt at constructive help was met with hostility and accusations that I was being controlling with my precious money. About 6 months ago, the phone calls from Dad increased. No longer monthly, they became weekly. The questions became more specific, more probing. How liquid are your investments? What's the penalty for early withdrawal from your retirement accounts? How much equity do you have in your condo? In retrospect, these were reconnaissance missions, not fatherly check-ins. I should have seen what was coming, but some part of me still wanted to believe that I mattered to them beyond my financial utility. I was wrong. So terribly, painfully wrong. The Sunday when everything changed started normally enough. I was working on a personal coding project when my phone rang. Dad's voice had that forced casualness I'd come to dread. "Son, Haley and I are in the neighborhood. Thought we'd stop by for dinner." They'd never visited my condo before without an explicit invitation. Dad lived across town, and Haley's apartment was in Somerville. Nobody was in the neighborhood by accident. "Sure," I replied, already feeling a knot forming in my stomach. "I can order takeout." "Great. We'll be there in 20. I spent those 20 minutes straightening up and bracing myself for whatever crisis had prompted this unexpected visit. When they arrived, the contrast between them was striking. Dad looked grim but determined, while Haley couldn't meet my eyes, her usual confidence nowhere to be seen. The Thai food I ordered sat mostly untouched as we exchanged awkward small talk about the weather and local sports teams. Finally, as I was clearing the plates, Dad cleared his throat. "Blaze, we need to discuss a family matter." I sat down slowly, my body tensing. "What's going on?" "Your sister has run into some financial difficulties." A familiar opening line. I waited for the other shoe to drop. "How much this time?" I asked, unable to keep the weariness from my voice. Dad glanced at Haley, who suddenly found her napkin fascinating. $870,000. I actually laughed, thinking it was a joke. "Very funny. Seriously, what's going on?" "This is serious, son." Dad's voice had that authoritative tone he used when brooking no argument. "Your sister owes people. Dangerous people." I looked between them, waiting for the punchline that never came. That's more than my condo is worth. That's my entire life savings and then some." Haley finally spoke, her voice small. "I didn't mean for it to get this bad. It started with just a few thousand at the casino. Then I tried to win it back, and they offered me credit, and it just..." She trailed off, tears streaming down her face. "So you're not just asking for help with a debt," I said slowly. "You're asking me to liquidate everything I've worked for over the past decade." "Don't be so dramatic," Dad snapped. "It's just money. You can earn more. Your sister's safety is at stake." "And why can't she declare bankruptcy?" I asked. "Or sell her assets? Or you use your retirement fund?" "Gambling debts aren't dischargeable in bankruptcy," Dad said, as if he'd researched this thoroughly. "And these aren't the kind of people who accept payment plans. They want their money now." "I've already sold my car and emptied my accounts," Haley added, as if this significant sacrifice should impress me. The designer watch on her wrist suggested she hadn't sold everything. "What about your house, Dad, your retirement?" "Don't be ridiculous. I'm 70 years old. Where would I live? Besides, my retirement wouldn't cover half of this amount. You're the only one with the resources to handle this." The unfairness of it all hit me like a physical blow. So I should give up my home, my future security, everything I've worked for, because Haley made a series of terrible decisions? "This is what family does," Dad said, his voice hardening. "We take care of each other. Your mother would be ashamed of your selfishness right now." The mention of Mom, wielded like a weapon, made something crack inside me. I'd spent my entire adult life trying to be the son she would be proud of, responsible, hard-working, generous. But in this moment, I wondered what she'd really think about this situation. "When do they need the money?" I asked, my voice hollow. Dad and Haley exchanged glances, clearly surprised by what they perceived as my capitulation. "Tomorrow morning," Dad said, "and no delays. These people don't mess around." I nodded slowly. "I'll need to make some calls to my bank and broker first thing in the morning." Relief flooded Haley's face. "Thank you, Blaze. I swear I'll pay you back someday." We both knew that was a lie, just like we both knew this wouldn't be the last time something like this happened. If I gave in now, I'd be signing up for a lifetime of financial servitude to my sister's addictions. I need to be alone to process this, I said, standing up, and to figure out how I'm going to rebuild my life from zero at 32. Dad clapped my shoulder as they prepared to leave. You've always been the responsible one. That's why we knew we could count on you. Not because they loved me, not because they valued me as a person. Because I was reliable, useful, an ATM with legs and a beating heart. I'll have the money ready tomorrow, I said. Come by around noon. They left, visibly relieved, already discussing where they'd go for celebratory drinks. As I closed the door behind them, something shifted inside me. A lifetime of compounded resentment crystallizing into crystal-clear resolve. They thought they knew exactly what I would do. They were wrong. The moment the door closed behind them, I collapsed onto my sofa, my entire body shaking. $870,000. More than I had. More than everything I'd worked for over the past decade. My entire identity had been built around being the responsible one, the reliable one, the one who sacrificed for family. But this would destroy me. As the initial shock subsided, a strange calm settled over me. I grabbed my laptop and began researching, pulling up bank accounts, investment statements, property records. The numbers confirmed what I already knew. Even if I liquidated everything, cashed out retirement accounts with penalties, took a second mortgage on my condo, emptied every last account, I'd still fall short of the demanded amount. Memories flooded back unbidden. Haley's 16th birthday, when she received a car while I was still taking the bus to my part-time job at 20. The Christmas when my carefully saved for gift to Dad was overshadowed by Haley's thoughtless trinket. The time I couldn't attend a friend's wedding because I'd emptied my vacation fund to cover Haley's rent arrears. My entire life had been shaped by their expectations and demands. And for what? Where was the appreciation? Where was the reciprocity? When had either of them ever sacrificed anything for me? At midnight, I called the only person I truly trusted, my college roommate and still best friend, Michael, who now worked for a major bank. "Blaze, what's wrong?" "It's midnight," his sleep-heavy voice answered. "I need your help. Can you meet me? It's an emergency." To his credit, Michael didn't hesitate. Corner diner in 20. The all-night diner was nearly empty when we met. Michael listened without interruption as I explained the situation, his expression growing increasingly disturbed. "This is financial abuse," he said finally. "You know that, right?" "I'm starting to." Michael ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "Even if you wanted to pay this, which I strongly advise against, you'd be enabling serious criminal behavior. Legitimate casinos don't send thugs to collect debts. They go through legal channels. This sounds like illegal gambling. So what are my options? Legally? Tell them no. Report the threats to the police if necessary. Establish boundaries." I laughed bitterly. "You've never met my father. Boundaries aren't in his vocabulary. Then maybe it's time for more drastic boundaries." Michael leaned forward, his expression serious. "Blaze, I've watched you deplete your resources for these people for years. It will never stop. There will always be another crisis, another demand. The question is, how much more of your life are you willing to sacrifice?" His words crystallized what I'd already been thinking. I need to disappear. The next few hours were a blur of planning. Michael, with his banking expertise, was invaluable. He explained how I could protect my assets, which accounts to close, which to transfer. He warned against using credit cards or phone once I left, as they could be traced. He recommended using only cash for at least the first month. "Where will you go?" he asked. "Better if you don't know. Plausible deniability." He nodded grimly. "I'll check on your condo periodically and work with a realtor when you're ready to sell. I can forward essential mail." By dawn, I had a plan. I called my company's HR department as soon as they opened, requesting immediate personal leave for a family emergency. My excellent work record made the approval swift and unquestioning. Next came the hardest part, deciding what to take and what to leave behind. A life distilled into a backpack and a medium-sized suitcase. Clothes, laptop, essential documents. A few sentimental items that couldn't be replaced. Everything else would stay. "Just possessions," I told myself, trying to ignore the grief rising in my throat as I looked around the home I'd created. I visited my bank in person, closing certain accounts and converting a significant sum to cash, staying just under the reporting threshold. I left enough in my main checking account to appear normal if anyone checked immediately. As I worked, a strange sense of liberation began to rise alongside the fear and grief. For the first time in my adult life, I was making a decision solely for myself, prioritizing my well-being over others' demands. The final task was preparing the box. I gathered years of receipts, transfer confirmations, and bank statements documenting every dollar I'd given my family. The total, when I finally calculated it, made me physically nauseous. Over $1 million over the past decade. More than the current demand. I'd already paid my sister's debts many times over. I added photos I'd saved of Haley's social media posts, tropical vacations, and shopping sprees that mysteriously occurred shortly after her emergency financial requests. A particularly damning image showed her flaunting a Chanel bag while standing next to her luxury car, posted 2 days after I'd transferred $20,000 for her critical medical bills. The final item in the box was a letter. Not apologizing, not justifying, simply stating what I'd given, what I'd sacrificed, and that I was done. No anger, no accusations, just facts and a goodbye. I placed the box on my dining table with a simple note on top. Open me. My realtor friend agreed to list my property in a few months, after the dust settled. My mail would be forwarded to a post office box that Michael would check. My resignation letter, dated 3 weeks in the future, was scheduled to send automatically to my employer. Clean breaks, all of them. As I took a final walk through my condo, running my fingers along the walls, saying goodbye to the life I'd built, I felt an unexpected emotion cutting through the sadness and fear. Hope. Hope that somewhere, beyond my father's reach, I might discover who Blaze really was, outside of his utility to others. I woke before my alarm at 4:30 in the morning, though woke implies I'd actually slept. In reality, I dozed fitfully, jerking awake from anxiety dreams where I was running but going nowhere. The irony wasn't lost on me. My movements were mechanical as I showered and dressed in nondescript jeans and a plain gray sweater clothes that wouldn't draw attention or stick in anyone's memory. I'd already cleared my browsing history and restored my laptop to factory settings. My old phone would stay behind, while a new prepaid one sat in my pocket, activated but used only for emergencies. The sky was still dark as I carried my luggage to my car. The backpack contained essentials for immediate needs, while the medium-sized suitcase held enough clothes for a fresh start. Everything else, furniture, books, kitchenware, the art I'd collected would remain behind. Just things, I reminded myself. Replaceable things. I took one last look at my condo, memorizing the way morning light was just beginning to filter through the windows I'd installed myself. 3 years of weekends spent renovating this place, creating a home that reflected my taste rather than my father's expectations. The granite countertops I'd splurged on, the custom bookshelves built into the living room wall, the peaceful blue bedroom that had been my sanctuary. All of it abandoned in exchange for freedom. The box sat on the dining table where I'd left it, innocuous yet explosive. Inside was a decade of receipts, transfer records, and bank statements documenting every dollar I'd given to Haley and Dad. Over $1 million in total, all meticulously recorded. Also included were screenshots of Haley's social media posts showing expensive purchases made days after receiving my emergency funds and a letter explaining why I could no longer be their personal bank. I placed my keys and old phone beside the box. No turning back now. The drive to the airport through deserted early morning streets felt surreal. Traffic lights changed for phantom cars. A few delivery trucks rumbled past. A newspaper carrier tossed rolled papers onto driveways. Normal life continuing while mine imploded and reformed. Boston's Logan International Airport was beginning to stir when I arrived. I'd deliberately chosen a Wednesday morning flight to Portland, Oregon, a midweek departure when business travelers dominated and casual observers were minimal. I paid for long-term parking even though I had no intention of returning for my car. Just another layer of misdirection. At the ticket counter, I purchased my one-way ticket with cash, ignoring the agent's raised eyebrows. I provided my real ID. I wasn't doing anything illegal, just disappearing from my family's radar. The boarding pass felt heavy in my hand, weighed with significance. Security was mercifully quick at that early hour. As I placed my shoes and laptop in the plastic bin, I checked my watch. 6:15 a.m. Dad and Haley wouldn't arrive at my condo until noon, expecting me to hand over my liquidated life savings. By then, I'd be nearly 3,000 miles away. I resisted the urge to power up my old phone, knowing there would be no messages that mattered. Instead, I found a quiet corner of the departure gate and sipped mediocre coffee, watching business travelers tap on laptops and families wrangle sleepy children. Normal people with presumably normal families who didn't view them as ATMs. The boarding process was a blur. I found my window seat, stowed my backpack, and gazed out at the tarmac where workers loaded luggage and refueled the plane. A lump formed in my throat as the reality of what I was doing hit me. I wasn't just leaving a financial situation. I was leaving the only family I had left. When the plane's wheels lifted off the runway at 7:45 a.m., I closed my eyes and exhaled deeply. There's something final about the moment a plane leaves the ground, a commitment made, a direction chosen, forward momentum that cannot be easily reversed. The 6-hour flight to Portland passed in a haze. I declined the in-flight meal, my stomach too knotted for food. Instead, I stared out the window at clouds and distant landscapes, mentally rehearsing the next steps of my plan. Portland wasn't my final destination, just the first node in a deliberately convoluted journey. Upon landing, I moved briskly through the terminal, bypassing baggage claim with my carry-ons, and headed directly to ground transportation. No ride-share apps that could be traced. Instead, I took a regular taxi to Portland's Union Station. "Amtrak station, please," I told the driver, who nodded without interest. At Union Station, I purchased a ticket to Seattle with cash. Another misdirection. I had no intention of staying in Seattle either. The Cascades train would depart in 40 minutes, giving me just enough time to grab a sandwich from a station vendor. I forced myself to eat despite my lack of appetite, knowing I needed to maintain my strength. As the train rolled north through the Pacific Northwest, I checked my watch again. 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Dad and Haley would have arrived at my empty condo by now. Found the box. Read my letter. Their reaction wasn't difficult to imagine. Dad's face reddening with that familiar rage, Haley's theatrical tears, both of them frantically calling my disconnected phone. Michael had agreed to text my new prepaid phone only in case of genuine emergency. When the message came at 2:15 Eastern Time, my heart rate spiked. They came. They're furious. Stay safe. I stared at those 7 words until the screen dimmed, a mixture of relief, vindication, and grief washing over me. It was done. No going back now. In Seattle, I switched to my third transportation method of the day, boarding a southbound bus to Tacoma. From there, I'd take another bus east, creating a confusing trail before eventually doubling back toward the Northern California coast, my actual intended destination, though even Michael didn't know that part. That night, checked into a modest motel under my legal middle name, James. I sat on the edge of a sagging mattress and finally let the emotions come. I cried for the child who had tried so hard to earn his father's approval, for the young man who had sacrificed his own needs for family, for the adult who had finally recognized that no sacrifice would ever be enough. But mixed with the grief was something unexpected, a tremulous sense of freedom. For the first time in my 32 years, no one knew where I was or what I was doing. No one was calling with demands or expectations. My time, my resources, my future, all were finally, completely my own. I slept fitfully that first night of freedom, waking several times in a panic, reaching for my phone to check for emergency calls that never came. By morning, exhaustion had given way to a tentative calm. I showered, dressed, and checked the news on my laptop using the motel's Wi-Fi. No local Boston reports of violence or injuries, confirming my suspicion that the dangerous people Haley owed might have been exaggerated for dramatic effect. At 9 a.m., another text from Michael arrived. They called police. Police said no crime, you're an adult who can leave. They're threatening everything. I said nothing. Be careful. I smiled grimly. Dad would be pulling out all the stops, righteous anger, threats, perhaps even crocodile tears about concern for my safety. But the police would quickly determine what Michael already knew. I was an adult who had every right to walk away from toxic relationships. The journey continued. Multiple bus changes, cash transactions, motels booked under my middle name. A deliberate zigzag pattern across the Pacific Northwest before I finally turned south toward my real destination. a small coastal town in Northern California where, years ago during a rare solo vacation, I'd felt a sense of peace I'd never known in Boston. 6 days after leaving my condo, I arrived. Mendocino welcomed me with fog-shrouded cypress trees and the constant symphony of waves against cliffs. Not a permanent solution, but a place to catch my breath and plan my next steps. A place where Richard and Haley Winters would never think to look for their personal bankroll. While I was finding temporary accommodation in Mendocino, a storm was raging 3,000 miles away in Boston. Through Michael's carefully worded updates, I pieced together what happened after my departure. At precisely 12:07 p.m. on that fateful day, Dad and Haley had arrived at my condo, expecting to collect the $870,000 they'd demanded. Using the spare key I'd once given Dad for emergencies, they entered without knocking, their first indication of the entitlement that had characterized our relationship for years. "Blaze?" Dad had called out, his voice echoing through the empty condo. The stillness that greeted them was their first clue that something was amiss. The second was my phone and keys sitting beside the box on the dining table. According to Michael, who heard the story from my neighbor across the hall, the shouting began almost immediately after Dad opened the box. First came rage bellows of ungrateful and selfish that penetrated the walls and drew concerned looks from neighbors. Then came panic as the reality set in. I was gone, and with me, any hope of an easy solution to Haley's debt problem. The contents of that box had been carefully curated to tell the story of years of financial exploitation. The first section contained bank records documenting every transfer I'd made to either of them over the past decade, organized chronologically and totaling over $1 million. The second section held the social media evidence. Screenshots of Haley's Instagram and Facebook posts showing her luxury purchases, tropical vacations, and designer shopping sprees, all time-stamped days after receiving emergency funds from me for supposedly dire situations. Particularly damning was a photo of her celebrating her new beginnings at a 5-star Bali resort 3 days after I'd liquidated an investment to cover what she'd described as crippling medical debt. The third section was a detailed accounting of the sacrifices these transfers had forced on me. The vacations canceled, the home repairs delayed, the retirement contributions reduced, each with a monetary value assigned, but also with the personal cost noted. Missed best friend's wedding to cover Haley's rent, $4,000. Cost to friendship, immeasurable. Finally, there was my letter. Not angry, not accusatory, simply matter of fact, explaining that I had reached my limit, that I would no longer set myself on fire to keep them warm, and that I wished them well in finding a solution that didn't involve destroying my future. The neighbor reported that Dad had stormed out to his car, phone pressed to his ear, presumably calling my workplace, friends, anyone who might know where I'd gone. Haley had remained inside longer, and when she finally emerged, her makeup was streaked with tears that, for once, might have been genuine. My phone, the one I'd left behind, received 67 missed calls in the first 24 hours. Voicemails ranged from Dad's cold fury, "You've made the biggest mistake of your life," to Haley's tearful pleas. "Please, Blaze, I'm scared. These people are serious." By day 3, the messages had turned threatening. Legal action, police reports, public shaming. Michael, true to his word, revealed nothing despite significant pressure. "Your father came to the bank. He texted me a week after my departure, tried to convince me it was a mental health emergency. I told him if he was genuinely concerned, he should file a missing persons report. He declined, telling. Through cautious online research using public library computers, I learned that no missing persons report was ever filed. No concerned appeals appeared in local media. No social media campaigns to find me emerged. Just anger at the ATM that had suddenly gone out of service. 2 weeks into my disappearance, Michael reported a telling development. Haley had begun selling her luxury items. The designer bags went first, then the jewelry, followed by her car. Dad, meanwhile, had made an appointment with his financial advisor to discuss early withdrawal options for his retirement accounts. "The debt must be real," Michael texted, "but maybe not as dangerous as they claimed. Seems like they're handling it through conventional channels now." This confirmed what I'd suspected. While the debt was likely real, the dangerous people narrative had been embellished to maximize my sense of urgency and responsibility. a manipulation tactic I'd fallen for countless times before. By the 1-month mark, through careful probing by Michael, I learned that Dad had indeed dipped into his retirement savings. Haley had moved from her luxury apartment to a shared rental and taken a job as a restaurant hostess, possibly her first legitimate employment in years. The debt was being addressed, albeit slowly, without my financial sacrifice. My company had accepted my formal resignation without much question. 2 decades of impeccable work ethic had earned me the benefit of the doubt, and the HR director simply wished me well in my new endeavors. My accumulated vacation pay and final paycheck were deposited electronically, funds I monitored but didn't touch, still operating solely on the cash I'd withdrawn before leaving. The story my family crafted to explain my absence revealed much about their priorities. Rather than express concern, they told mutual acquaintances that I had gone through some kind of breakdown and was taking time to get help. The narrative painted them as concerned family members and me as mentally unstable, preserving their social standing, while explaining why they suddenly couldn't ask me for money. As weeks turned to months, the frequency of their attempts to locate me decreased. The calls to my old number stopped. The emails became sporadic, then ceased entirely. Not because they'd accepted my choice, Michael clarified, but because they'd finally realized it wasn't yielding results. "Your father asked if I thought you'd ever come back," Michael texted around the 3-month mark. I said I didn't know. He said, "Tell him there's nothing to come back to." I think he meant it as a threat, but honestly it sounded like freedom to me. Freedom indeed. As I established my new life in California, I processed the complex emotions of this permanent break. Grief for the family relationship I'd always hoped for but never truly had. Guilt that occasionally surfaced when I imagined them struggling without my financial support. But increasingly, relief and validation as I witnessed them adapting to life without their human ATM. They were surviving, finding solutions that didn't involve exploiting me, managing their problems like adults. All things they could have done years ago had I not been the easier option. 6 months into my new life, a final piece of information from Michael confirmed I'd made the right choice. "Ran into your cousin Amanda at a conference. She found out what happened from your dad, saw through his version, said to tell you she understands completely and doesn't blame you one bit. Said your aunt had been concerned about the dynamic for years. That validation from extended family I'd rarely been allowed to connect with closely was the final confirmation. The problem had never been me. I wasn't heartless, selfish, or cruel for protecting myself. I was simply the first person in our family dynamic to say enough." Mendocino's fog-shrouded coastline became my sanctuary during those first uncertain months. I rented a small studio apartment above a bookstore, paying 3 months in advance with cash, a premium price for privacy and no questions asked. The elderly bookstore owner, Martha, seemed to sense I was running from something but respected my boundaries, limiting our interactions to pleasant nods and occasional comments about the weather. After 2 weeks of decompression, sleeping late, walking the headlands, processing the seismic shift in my life, I contacted my company, not to return, but to propose a remote work arrangement. My skills as a software engineer were valuable enough that, despite my abrupt departure, they were open to discussion. We negotiated a contract position at reduced hours, allowing me income without requiring my physical presence or revealing my location. With basic financial security established, I began creating a simple but meaningful new life. My studio apartment gradually accumulated the essentials: a comfortable reading chair, a desk positioned to view the ocean, cookware for preparing simple meals. Nothing extravagant, nothing that couldn't be left behind if necessary, but enough to create a home. The small coastal community provided anonymity within its transient population of tourists and seasonal workers. I introduced myself as James, my middle name, and offered minimal personal details. When asked where I was from, I gave the vague but not untrue answer, East Coast, and quickly redirected conversations. My first genuine connection came unexpectedly through Jacob, a local carpenter who occupied the studio next to mine. After nodding hello for weeks, he finally knocked on my door one evening with a practical proposition. "Power's out in my place," he said matter-of-factly. "Got some fish that needs cooking before it spoils. You've got gas, I've got dinner. Deal?" That impromptu meal, fresh-caught rockfish cooked on my stove, shared over mismatched plates at my small table, became the foundation of my first friendship in my new life. Jacob, in his 50s and divorced, had his own reasons for keeping to himself, creating a mutual respect for boundaries that made connection possible. "Everyone in Mendocino is running from something or toward something," he observed one evening as we shared a beer on the fire escape that served as our shared balcony. "Nobody asks too many questions here." Through Jacob, I cautiously expanded my social circle, meeting other local artists, tradespeople, and service workers who formed the year-round backbone of the tourist town. None became close friends, but each interaction helped rebuild my atrophied social skills and trust in relationships. 3 months into my new life, I found a therapist in nearby Fort Bragg who agreed to cash payments. Dr. Eleanor Sullivan, a silver-haired woman with penetrating eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, helped me navigate the complex emotions of my family estrangement. "What you're describing is financial abuse," she stated in our first session, echoing Michael's assessment. "The dynamics were established early: your role as provider, your sisters as recipient, your father as enforcer. Breaking that pattern took extraordinary courage." Week by week, Dr. Sullivan helped me understand how my family's dysfunction had shaped my self-worth, my relationships, my entire worldview. I began to recognize patterns of people-pleasing, excessive responsibility, and difficulty setting boundaries that extended beyond my family into my work and friendships. "The question now," she said in our 6th session, "is who are you when you're not defined by what you can provide to others? Who is Blaze or James, if you prefer, when he's free to choose his own path?" That question became my North Star, as I gradually explored interests and passions I'd never had time for while working 60-hour weeks and managing family crises. I joined a local hiking group, exploring the magnificent redwood forests inland from the coast. I took a pottery class at the community center, producing lopsided but personally meaningful mugs and bowls. I volunteered at beach cleanups and community garden projects. Each new experience was a data point in discovering who I truly was when not defined by others' expectations. Some activities resonated deeply, others didn't. For perhaps the first time in my life, both outcomes felt equally valuable information about myself, freely gathered, without judgment or consequence. At the 6-month mark, I made a significant commitment to my new life, purchasing a small cottage on the outskirts of town. The property, barely 700 square feet with a detached garage that previous owners had converted to a rudimentary office, represented more than just housing. It was a statement of intent, a commitment to building a life that belonged wholly to me. Through Michael, I arranged for the sale of my Boston condo, which sold quickly in the hot market. The proceeds, after paying off the remaining mortgage, provided enough to purchase the Mendocino cottage outright and establish a new investment portfolio smaller than before, but unencumbered by others' financial emergencies. My remote work expanded as my reputation for quality and reliability grew. I developed a specialized expertise in security systems for financial institutions, ironically protecting others' assets while I rebuilt my own. The work was intellectually challenging and paid well, but I maintained strict boundaries: 40 hours maximum, no weekends, no emergency calls outside business hours. These boundaries extended to personal relationships as well. I dated occasionally, transparent about my desire to move slowly, and my reluctance to discuss my past in detail. Most connections were brief but pleasant, teaching me more about my needs and preferences without the pressure of family approval or long-term expectations. Through all this, Michael remained my tether to the past. His updates about my family came less frequently as time passed, but provided necessary closure. 8 months after my departure, he reported that Haley had maintained her restaurant job and been promoted to assistant manager. Dad had downsized to a smaller house, his retirement funds partially depleted but stabilized. "They don't talk about you much anymore," Michael texted. "I think they've accepted you're not coming back." The holiday season, my first without family, brought unexpected emotional challenges. Thanksgiving approached with memories of forced family gatherings where my contributions were simultaneously expected and undervalued. Christmas loomed with its emphasis on family reconciliation and togetherness. Rather than isolate myself, I accepted Jacob's invitation to a misfit Thanksgiving at his cabin inland, joining a dozen other people without local family. We each brought dishes, shared stories, and created a warmth that had nothing to do with obligation or history. For Christmas, I volunteered at the community center, serving meals, finding meaning in connection without expectation. On New Year's Eve, sitting alone on my cottage porch watching distant fireworks over the ocean, I realized a full year had passed since the demands that had catalyzed my disappearance. 365 days of rebuilding, discovering, healing. I raised a solitary glass of champagne to myself, not in celebration of leaving, but of finding the courage to stay gone. The new year brought unexpected reconnection when I received an email from my cousin Amanda, forwarded through Michael. She'd figured out a way to contact me that wouldn't compromise my privacy. "I want you to know that many in the extended family suspected what was happening," she wrote. "Aunt Sarah, your mother's sister, tried to talk to your dad about it years ago and was completely shut out afterward. None of us blame you for protecting yourself. If you ever want to reconnect with those of us who actually care about you as a person, not a checkbook, the door is open." That email opened a careful correspondence with a few maternal relatives I'd barely known growing up. Through them, I gained insights into my mother's life and perspectives that had been filtered through my father's narratives. I learned she had been concerned about his favoritism toward Haley even before her illness, had tried to establish more equitable treatment. "Your mother would be proud of the boundaries you've set," Aunt Sarah wrote in one email. "She always worried you'd be taken advantage of because of your responsible nature." As my first year of freedom approached completion, I found myself drawn to giving back in ways that honored my journey. I established a small scholarship at the local community college, specifically for students, demonstrating financial responsibility while supporting family members. I began mentoring young programmers from disadvantaged backgrounds, teaching coding skills that could lead to financial independence. The irony wasn't lost on me that I found myself more genuinely generous now that giving was fully my choice, without coercion or manipulation. I could support causes and individuals that aligned with my values, without draining my own resources or sacrificing my well-being. "That's the difference between generosity and exploitation," Dr. Sullivan noted when I shared this observation. "True generosity comes from abundance and choice, not obligation and fear." As my new life in California solidified, my professional network gradually rebuilt under my more authentic identity. Colleagues knew me as James, the reliable, boundary-conscious developer who delivered quality work without burning himself out. Friends knew me as the quiet neighbor always willing to help with community projects, who made excellent coffee and terrible pottery. Both versions were authentic pieces of who I was becoming, a person defined by his own choices rather than others' expectations. 2 years after my dramatic departure from Boston, my little coastal cottage had become truly home. The once bare walls now displayed local artwork and photographs of new memories. The garden I'd started with, a few tentative herbs, had expanded to include vegetables and native flowering plants that attracted hummingbirds and butterflies. The converted garage had transformed into a proper office where I worked remotely, now as an independent consultant for several tech companies. My life had developed a rhythm and purpose entirely my own. Mornings began with coffee on the porch, watching fog dissipate over the ocean. Work filled the middle hours, intellectually stimulating without being all-consuming. Evenings brought community activities, quiet reading, or dinner, with the small circle of friends I'd carefully cultivated. The most significant change, however, wasn't external but internal. The constant anxiety that had been my companion for decades, the fear of never doing enough, being enough, providing enough, had gradually subsided. In its place grew a steady self-assurance, a knowledge that my worth wasn't tied to my utility to others. Dr. Sullivan, whose weekly sessions had decreased to monthly check-ins, noted this transformation during our 2-year anniversary session. "When you first came here," she observed, "you spoke almost exclusively in terms of what you'd done for others and what you'd failed to do. Now you speak in terms of what brings you joy, what challenges you, what you value. That's profound growth." That growth had come with difficult decisions and milestones. Perhaps the most significant had been 6 months earlier, when I finally blocked my father's number permanently. He'd continued to email occasionally messages that vacillated between guilt-inducing nostalgia, thinly veiled accusations, and sometimes, when those approaches failed, outright hostility. The final message that prompted my decision had come after I'd ignored several previous attempts. "Your sister has finally gotten her act together without your help. Seems like your abandonment was the wake-up call she needed. Ironic that your selfishness actually helped her in the end." Those words attempting to reframe my self-preservation as both selfish and somehow beneficial to Haley crystallized the manipulation that had characterized our relationship. I blocked the email address without responding, closing that channel of communication permanently. Through Michael and occasionally Amanda, I did receive updates about my family. Haley had indeed maintained her job at the restaurant and eventually been promoted to manager. She'd been sober for 18 months and joined a support group for gambling addiction. She'd even started taking business classes at the local community college. This news brought complicated emotions. Genuine happiness for her progress, mixed with the bitter recognition that it had taken my complete removal from the equation rather than the countless times I'd tried to help constructively to catalyze real change. It validated my decision while simultaneously highlighting the tragedy that it had been necessary. Dad, according to these updates, had never acknowledged his role in the family dysfunction. He'd created a narrative where I had abandoned them in their time of need, conveniently omitting the years of financial support I'd provided and the unreasonable nature of their final demand. In his version, Haley's recovery occurred despite my betrayal, not because of the new reality my absence created. "He'll never change," Michael told me during one of his rare visits to California. "Some people can't face their own contributions to a problem because it would require rebuilding their entire identity." Through therapy and distance, I'd come to understand that my father's behavior stemmed from his own unresolved issues, perhaps fear of failure, inability to set boundaries with Haley, or using her dependence to ensure his continued relevance. Understanding this didn't excuse the damage he'd caused, but it helped me process my feelings without being consumed by anger or resentment. The journey of self-forgiveness had been perhaps the most challenging aspect of my healing. For months, I'd grappled with guilt over abandoning my family, despite the clear evidence that staying would have destroyed me financially and emotionally. "You didn't abandon them," Dr. Sullivan had pointed out. "You stopped enabling destructive behavior after years of support and attempts at constructive help. There's a profound difference." Gradually, I'd come to recognize the truth in her words. My departure hadn't been a first resort, but a last one, chosen after every other option had been exhausted. The fact that both Haley and Dad had found ways to address the gambling debt without my financial sacrifice confirmed what I'd suspected. My resources had been the easy solution, not the only one. My therapy sessions helped me identify the patterns in my family dynamic that I needed to avoid replicating in new relationships. I learned to recognize early warning signs of one-sided relationships, to set and maintain healthy boundaries, to differentiate between genuine reciprocity and transactional connections. These lessons extended to my financial decisions as well. While I'd rebuilt a comfortable nest egg through my consulting work, I maintained a simpler lifestyle than before. Not from fear of scarcity, but from a newfound appreciation for what truly contributed to my well-being. The freedom of having savings without constant demands on them. The security of investments chosen based on my goals rather than others' emergencies. The peace of making financial decisions deliberately rather than reactively. My life in Mendocino had expanded beyond my initial tight circle. I joined the volunteer fire department, taught coding classes at the high school, and become part of the fabric of the small community in ways that felt genuine and reciprocal. I contributed my skills, time, and yes, sometimes financial resources, but always by choice rather than coercion. Through a carefully anonymous blog, I'd begun sharing my experience with financial abuse and family estrangement. The response had been overwhelming. Hundreds of comments and messages from people in similar situations who found validation and courage in my story. "I finally recognized what was happening after reading your post," one commenter wrote. "Today I said no to my brother's emergency loan request for the first time in 15 years. The sky didn't fall. Thank you for helping me find my voice." These connections, made across digital distance with people I'd never meet, brought meaning to my experience. The pain I'd endured could serve as a lighthouse for others navigating similar treacherous waters. On the second anniversary of my departure, a date I now thought of as my Independence Day, I sat on my cottage porch watching the sunset paint the Pacific in shades of gold and crimson. Beside me sat Jacob, now my closest friend, and Elaine, the marine biologist I'd been dating for 6 months. Both new versions of my story, shared in my own time and terms. "Any regrets?" Jacob asked. nodding toward the ocean, as if my past lay somewhere beyond that endless horizon. I considered the question carefully, giving it the weight it deserved. "I regret that it came to such a dramatic break," I said finally. "I regret the years I spent trying to buy love and approval that were never for sale, but I don't regret choosing myself in the end. Sometimes the price of freedom is steep, but it's still worth paying." The sun slipped below the horizon, darkness gathering as stars began to appear. In that moment of transition from day to night, I felt the truth of my journey settle into my bones. I had lost a family but found myself. I had abandoned an impossible situation but built something authentic and sustainable. I had exchanged conditional acceptance for genuine connection. It hadn't been an easy path. The grief still surfaced occasionally, the what-ifs still whispered in quiet moments. But those voices grew fainter with each passing season. Each new memory created, each moment lived on my own terms. If you've stayed with me through this story, I hope it's brought you some insight or perspective on your own relationships and boundaries. Family ties are powerful, but they shouldn't be chains. Love shouldn't come with financial handcuffs. And sometimes, the most loving thing you can do for yourself and ultimately for others is to step away from dynamics that harm everyone involved. Have you ever had to make a difficult break from someone you loved for your own well-being? Or are you currently struggling with boundaries in important relationships? Share your experience in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please subscribe and share it with someone who might need to hear that it's okay to prioritize their own oxygen mask first. Thank you for listening. And remember, your worth isn't measured by what you give to others, but by the life you have the courage to create for yourself.